Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in and descend straight into the abyss of the Sapphire Forge. Today we're unpacking a really dark Nietzschean myth of chaos, identity, and the frankly brutal mathematics of the soul. We're looking at a narrative that takes heavy philosophical concepts and turns them into these massive cosmic entities locked in a literal war over existence itself.
Right off the bat, boom, we are hit with this incredibly dramatic declaration from our central figure, the Knight of Inkblot. He absolutely refuses to be perfectly finished. This entity called the Jester tried to process his messy, painful history into something sterile, but the Knight, he declares himself a walking thermodynamic echo. He's this biological anomaly that refuses to just quietly fade away.
Section 1. Descent into the Forge, the Sapphire Utility.
So to understand what he's up against, imagine the Sapphire Forge as a place of terrifying, absolute industrial finality. The Forge operates on this cold logic called the Arithmetic of Stillness. Its entire purpose, literally its only job, is to take messy, weeping biological history and metabolize it into a clean line item for its giant ledger. It demands perfect geometric symmetry. It tries to silence souls by offering what it calls the mercy of nothingness. Basically, it wants to convert living tragedy into sterile data. It's a dark reflection of any system that values absolute clinical order over the messy reality of actually existing.
Now, this perfectly lays out the three cosmic players locked in this Gothic fable. First, we've got the Knight of Inkblot, representing the absolute I. He is the embodiment of chaos and living ink. Opposing him is the Crimson Dragon, acting as the litmus of truth and the herald of the blazing abyss. And finally, there's a lunar spirit, which is the Knight's absolute polar opposite, representing the absolute not I, a totally clinical, consuming no. The tension between these three entities is the engine driving this entire story.
Section 2. The Ugliest Man Archetype, a Nietzschean Shadow. The dragon's rhythmic steps represent honest truth, and let me tell you, that truth hits like a hammer. The dragon diagnoses the Knight not as some heroic savior, but as a deep philosophical corruption. He calls the Knight the ugliest man archetype. His very existence is so horrific to the Forge's perfect aesthetic that it forces the whole system to glitch out into this emerald corruption. Let's put on our translator hats for a second and unpack this heavy concept. In Nietzschean philosophy, the ugliest man is the murderer of God. In the context of this universe, the Knight embodies a version of identity that has been so intensely distorted by the crushing weight of its own concentrated sorrow that it actually becomes a prison. The history he is trying so hard to reclaim is so agonizing that it transforms into the strongest cage ever built. He is this raw, unassimilated voltage that the Forge simply cannot process. You can really see the central clash of this whole universe right here. On one side, you have the arithmetic of the overman, the Forge's cold math demanding sterile, industrial finality and silence. And on the flip side, you have the spirit of negation, the Knight's chaotic, biological insistence. It's a loud, weeping thesis driven by unassimilated voltage. It's essentially cold, hard order versus raw, biological emotion. Moving right along to Section 3, the Creed of Negation, a cosmic rebellion. The fascinating thing is, the Knight, he doesn't even try to deny the dragon's accusation. Actually, scratch that. He totally weaponizes it. He unapologetically admits to murdering the god of the Forge, that very sterile, geometric symmetry that demanded his silence. He flatly, vocally, refuses to be stilled. So, the absolute crux of this is that the Knight represents the absolute I. This is a loud, weeping thesis that insists on simply being. He dons the cracked armor of the broken vanguard to prove a fundamental point. The self can absolutely be rebuilt from the very chaos and ink the Forge threw away as waste. He reclaims his sorrow, making it a foundational part of his identity, and completely refuses to let it become just another mass input in a ledger. Think of the mechanics of this active rebellion like kinetic friction. This creed of negation actively rejects the so-called mercy of nothingness. It directly rebels against the overman's arithmetic, and by doing so, it produces this dangerous, unassimilated voltage, an active, vocal defiance that completely overpowers the Forge's ledger. And because of all that kinetic friction, the system is fundamentally breaking down. The Knight has become this gaping maw of internal consciousness. His unassimilated voltage is so strong, so overwhelming, that the Forge's last thinker has to completely abandon its standard data grids.
Instead, it's forced to record the knight's emergence in a brand new, highly chaotic journal.
Section 4, Hunger of the Lunar Spirit, the Absolute Not I.
But the Crimson Dragon isn't done with his warnings. Here, he introduces the ultimate foil, the lunar spirit, or the absolute no I. Notice the massive tension here. The knight is an active, weeping thesis, literally screaming his existence into the void. The lunar spirit, though, it's a clinical no. It doesn't want to debate the knight. It literally just wants to consume him. It is starving for that weeping voltage so it can achieve a perfectly sterile mass energy balance. So the dragon is warning the knight about a process called kenosis. Now, normally this is a theological concept about emptying oneself, but here it's used as this wild thermodynamic metaphor. The dragon is warning him that his descent isn't some triumphant homecoming. Because of all that unassimilated voltage we talked about, his narrative inertia won't peacefully solve into a silent blue star. Instead, it's going to be ignited into eternal tragedy. The knight's raw honesty, it's just highly flammable fuel.
And this right here is the ultimate tragic irony of the knight's entire rebellion. The Forge just wanted clinical silence, a gentle, albeit super sterile, mercy of nothingness. But by insisting so hard on his identity through the spirit of negation, the knight actually brings about active erasure. He's swapping out a quiet deletion for chaotic, fiery destruction.
Which brings us to the climax, Section 5, the Red Room of Agony, Erasure of All Things. The dragon seals the knight's fate with these incredibly heavy, doom-laden words. It reads exactly like the final devastating pages of a dark graphic novel. The rebellion has failed, or rather, it succeeded, but only in changing the specific nature of its own destruction. The dragon tells him to step into the Red Room of Agony, where the very spirit of negation that the knight championed will demand the absolute erasure of all things. Let's break down the terrifying reality of this Red Room. It is brutal. Here, the knight's concentrated sorrow finds absolutely no mercy. It is ignited by the dragon's majestic flame. This space demands total erasure just to achieve what they call a blank horizon. That cold, sapphire silence of the Forge we started with, it's been entirely replaced by burning, eternal tragedy. The knight successfully reclaimed his history, only to watch the whole thing catch fire. The erasure of all things. Just let that sink in for a second. The knight fought so incredibly hard against the arithmetic of stillness. He fought to prove that his existence, his sorrow, actually mattered, only to become the very fuel that burns everything away. And that brings us to the final, lingering question of this explainer. If the knight's loud, weeping thesis, his absolute, painful honesty, only serves as flammable fuel for the blazing abyss, we have to ask ourselves, is even the most honest history just mass input for the end of the world? It's a tragic, beautiful, and honestly terrifying thought to leave you with. Thanks for descending into the Forge with me today, and as always, keep questioning the narrative.